focus on assembling a larger team because we would require investigators at a bunch of different hospital sites, ideally internationally, to be able to recruit to the clinical trial very rapidly, because we knew that we needed the answer to this question as quickly as possible, because at that time we had no therapeutic options for COVID at all, other than purely supportive care. Then I connected with Dr. Mary Cushman, who's a clinical epidemiologist and thrombosis-focused researcher at the University of Vermont. And she also runs a very large biorepository where her team stores samples on patients who are involved in research studies to help understand the underlying cause of a bunch of conditions. And so I was really excited and pleased to know that she was also really interested in being part of our trial. And I had asked her to be our third co-principal investigator. And so then we focused on building our team further. And we knew that we needed a team, particularly in the United States, that had a strong research infrastructure and ability to support the clinical trial running in the United States. And that was through Dr. Lisa Baumann-Kreuziger and her team, who've been outstanding. And even prior to that, though, through Dr. Saskia Middeldorp, who's an amazing thrombosis-focused clinical epidemiologist in the Netherlands, she connected us to Dr. Alnara Negri, who was hoping to launch a very similar trial to ours with Dr. Hassan Rahal and Dr. Carlos Pompilio in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And what was really amazing is that instead of our trials competing with one another, we decided to join forces. And we did that very early on, which was really incredible. And I'm incredibly grateful for their collaboration. Then we just kept moving forward and kept identifying other amazing, brilliant, collaborative, generous people in Canada, in the US, in Ireland, in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, in Argentina, and now in Iran. It's just been an incredible experience for me, identifying people who are of a similar mindset, who just want to get the good scientific work done, getting it done for the right reasons, which is really amazing.
So what are the challenges of bringing together a worldwide team?
Launching a clinical trial in different countries is a huge undertaking, and it takes an incredible amount of organization and making sure that you're doing everything right and to the letter, because the regulations and policies in different countries are different, and you have to be aware of them, and you have to go through the right hoops. Otherwise, you're at risk not only of conducting research unethically, but also legally. We have to be very careful that we are adhering to all of, the policies that are in place in different countries, and make sure that, of course, that we're adhering to Health Canada regulations, but then also consider the regulations in other countries like the FDA, like the SFDA, for example, in Saudi Arabia, et cetera. The only way to do that is with an amazing razor sharp team. And the team that was able to get us through all those hoops as the research coordination team. And so that was led at St. Mike's, and still continues to be led by Aziz Jawaji and Gurpreet Lakhanpal and Mercy Charles and Grace Tang and Vidushi Swarup, and then our amazing team at Versity as well. But there are similar teams in every site where our investigators are located. So we've spoken a lot, especially in Pillar of Hope, about the physicians and the scientists, but the physicians and scientists are nothing without a research coordination team. We can't get it done without the team. And it's in fact unethical to get it done without the team, because you can imagine that there could be coercion if everything is run through physicians, right? So you have to have a research coordinator who's at arm's length, who's not a part of the person's circle of care, the participant's circle of care, when they're first presenting the clinical trial for.
Anybody in Vancouver working on this project?
So one of our very key steering committee members, Dr. Agnes Lee, is a wonderful, very experienced clinical trialist who has been just tremendous in supporting the initial protocol development and assisting with grant writing. At the time, we thought of opening at Vancouver General Hospital, but ultimately decided against it because the numbers at the time were low. But the thing is that with this pandemic, what might be true one month isn't true the next. We don't have a site in British Columbia, but we could, but we just don't right now.
What has the impact of vaccines had on this study?
Yeah, great question. And this is a question that I'm asked by a lot of physicians too. So this is important even in the midst of the vaccine rollout for a couple reasons. Some of it for great scientific reasons, some of it for maybe some sad human reasons, unfortunately. So we know that this is not going to be the last pandemic. I hope it's the last pandemic of my lifetime, but there will be future pandemic that will likely involve the same type of virus, the coronavirus family. And it's likely that we will encounter a virus that has the same propensity to encourage the body to develop blood clots. So it's important for us to find out the answer for this pandemic, but also for future pandemic. Another reason why it's relevant, despite the vaccine rollout, is that for the vaccine to really be effective and for it to wipe out the virus, we really need the majority of the population to be vaccinated. And sadly, in Canada, we know that about 30% of people in Canada are hesitant about the vaccine. And so that's distressing because it means that the vaccine will help decrease transmission, will help decrease severity amongst those who are vaccinated and those who are close to those who are vaccinated. But because we're aware that there are people who are hesitant about receiving the vaccine, this unfortunately means that the pandemic is not likely to come under control as quickly as we had hoped. So that's also why our trial is relevant.
Why did you do a podcast?
Well, I was introduced to Jennifer Smith, who's the president and CEO of Everything Podcast, through Dr. Agnes Lee, as they are friends. And Aggie said that Jennifer described Jennifer as a visionary and said, Jennifer will figure it out. She'll figure something out, something creative to help promote awareness of the clinical trial and to hopefully help with the quest for additional funding, because that's been a challenge amidst the pandemic. And so then I was not familiar with podcasts other than being a listener of podcasts. And so then when I connected with Jennifer, and she and Cliff Dumas had described their proposal, it sounded really exciting for a bunch of reasons, but also the idea of kind of historically chronicling our journey and our struggle. And I mean, that was really exciting. Even though I'm a scientist, I will say that the arts have always come to me more naturally than science has. Science has always been harder for me. So I was intrigued and curious, and it was exciting also and distracting too. And the experience itself was hopeful for me. You know, engaging with everyone, including you, Dawn, was really amazing for us. And so you all made us feel like we were doing something that was bigger than ourselves and bigger than the trial. And so it was a wonderful experience.
Well, we were honored to help share your story. It's such important work. What have you learned? What's changed?
I've learned so much. It's almost difficult for me to describe it in a capsule. I've learned a lot about politics. I've learned about how to overcome struggle. I've learned about the importance of relationships, which was something that was always something that I knew, but this experience really highlighted it in a different way. I have been able to build relationships with people around the world via Zoom. I don't think I ever would have thought that would have been possible. And it's not just building the relationship, it's truly building a sense of trust, because they had to trust me and Mary and Peter and our teams to know that we were going to do right by them. And we have to trust them to know that they're going to do right by the participants recruited and that they're going to input the data effectively, because this work is so important and getting this information out in a timely fashion is so critical. So this experience has really highlighted the importance of trust and developing relationships. And I think, I find this word is unfortunately used probably excessively currently, this term resilience, but the people that I have met, I can't even begin to describe how strong they are. Many of them are absolutely on the front lines day in, day out, managing patients in critical care units, and yet still have the ability to focus on the science and the awareness of how important this clinical trial is. Dawn, you and I were talking earlier about some very difficult issues that humanity is facing, including issues pertaining to discrimination and health equity and et cetera, and how this last year has emphasized how important it is to address these issues and how much work is ahead of us. And so being part of this trial, I've encountered some of those same barriers and some of those same difficulties myself. It's hard sometimes as a more junior investigator who's also female to launch a clinical trial. And I'm grateful to have such incredible mentors and such an amazing supportive team and such amazing mentors at my hospital and research institute who just encouraged me to keep going. So, the old adage of it takes a village, it does, to raise a child, to raise a trial, to support an investigator, to support healthcare teams in the face of unbelievable struggle.
I'm speaking with Dr. Michelle Sholzberg, who's a clinical hematologist, and we're talking about the rapid COVID Coag study. Can you remember what your worst day was in the last year?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate to be part of medical leadership at St. Michael's Hospital. And so I became aware early on that we didn't have enough personal protective equipment. That was probably one of the darker moments in this for me, because I essentially just got on the phone and sent out emails to friends and family around the world, people who had dental practices, people who had spas, people who had any ability to access personal protective equipment, people who had connections to factories in different parts of the world, people who knew how to sew. It was distressing at that time because when I was on the phone with people, it was still so early that people didn't really believe what I was saying. And that was really hard. And so my parents, for example, just got on Amazon and started ordering whatever they could find and had it delivered to St. Michael's Hospital. My parents similarly have bought recently for the holidays, they went on Amazon and bought whatever uplifting items they could find so that we could circulate it amongst the staff. And we created little packages for people to say thank you. So people were, wearing little, things that had Santas coming out of their heads and eating chocolate bars and that kind of stuff.
With all the issues of COVID, there's an old adage that adversity brings out the best and worst in people. And it's nice to reflect on the better parts. Did you ever lose hope?
No. I've never lost hope because I believe that if you have no hope, you have nothing. And probably if I ever sensed that I was losing hope, it would probably be a signal for me that I was clinically depressed. And I'm not saying that flippantly because it's a real risk for healthcare providers. There was just another physician who took their life a couple of days ago in Canada. The pressures are huge, and there are a lot of people that are experiencing new mental health problems, relapses of previous mental health problems, addiction problems, etc., because this is really hard. And I think that crisis burnout is a very real thing. And that's not something that's unique to healthcare providers. The general public's exhausted. But I think that healthcare providers generally hold themselves to a higher standard and feel that we need to lead by example and to be very careful because we know that we have a long road ahead. So this isn't a race. At the beginning, it felt like a race. At the beginning, it really did. But we know now that it's a marathon.
I really want people to listen to Pillar of Hope, which is available on all podcasting platforms. But there were 4 episodes, and I'm curious, as you look back, where are we now? What's changed?
What has changed is that we've recruited more participants. So we're at 156 participants recruited today. So we're continuing to move forward. I also had a great conversation a couple of days ago. That was a very encouraging conversation from a funding perspective. Of course, we're still actively looking for more funding. So what has changed is we're still going and moving as fast as we possibly can.
Let's talk about funding for a minute, because funding has come up in all of our conversations about being a key issue. Can you unpack that for us? Why funding is so important and where does it come from?
So as a scientist in medicine, there are generally 2 avenues to obtain funding to support one's research. One, it's using peer-reviewed, sometimes publicly generated funding. So through, for example, the CIHR, the Canadian Institute for Healthcare Research, and other types of peer-reviewed grant processes, where you submit a proposal, and if it is thought to be a competitive proposal and one that is also important at that time,